Hello, my name is Leonard, and this is the Symantec Enterprise Vault 10 for Exchange Administration course, Lesson 13, Migrating PST Files. In this particular lesson, we're going to go through and introduce the concept of the PST migration, why you would want to do it, why it is important. Then we'll start looking at the tools that are available within Enterprise Vault to help you with the PST migration. We will specifically go through the steps associated with one of the tools, which is called the Locate, Collect, and Migrate method. We will also go through and look at the client-driven PST migration. So first, the introduction to the PST migration, the basic process and the importance of archiving your PST files. First, the PST issues. Why am I worried about archiving these items? These stored PSTs can reside on the local workstations where a lack of backup threatens the loss of data. Also, because this information is located on the local workstations, when I'm doing electronic discovery, it's sometimes very hard to find all of those files on the individual workstations, so it would be better to have them in an archive where I can search them. They also reside on file servers where they can lead to data corruption or fill up the file servers, and they complicate the data discovery, which I mentioned earlier. The main methods that we support in the Enterprise Vault infrastructure for doing the PST migrations, the first one is called the Locate, Collect, and Migrate PST migration, and that's going to be one of the ones that we're going to cover in this particular lesson. We also have the client-driven PST migration, and as the name implies, this allows the clients that have been configured to initiate the PST migration. And then we have the PST Migration Wizard. We will not be covering the detailed steps of the PST Migration Wizard in this particular lesson. We will be talking about times when you would want to use the PST Migration Wizard, however. And then we also have the Enterprise Vault Policy Manager, or EVPM, scripted migration. This feature is ideal for performing bulk migrations of the PST files. However, you must collect the PST files into a central location. And again, we're not going to be covering the specifics of this migration in this lesson either. So, starting off with the PST migration tools, when we get done with this topic, we should be able to describe the tools that are available for the migration of the PST files. We're going to look at Locate, Collect, and Migrate, and that's one method. And we're also going to consider the client-driven method. These features are only available when we're using the Locate, Collect, and Migrate and client-driven processes. So if I'm using one of the other methods, PST Migrator or the Enterprise Vault Policy Manager scripted migration, this functionality will not be available. But I can automatically adjust the Exchange mailbox quotas to accommodate these shortcuts that are being created as part of the PST migration. I can restrict the shortcut creation based upon the age of the item in the PST file. I can remove the PST file from the user's Outlook profile, which is an optional setting. I can also enable the administrator to specify a PST password during the migration process. So if the user has, in fact, assigned a password to their PST files as part of the migration process, I'll be able to type in that password to complete the PST migration. So just kind of an overview of the Enterprise Vault Policy Manager and PST Migration Wizard. The times that you're typically going to use these are going to be if you've exported from another system with the Export Archive Wizard, or you're going to be archiving these PST files into a shared archive or an archive that does not have an associated mailbox with it, or if a PST file is located on a volume hosted by a non-Windows server. So as I mentioned, we're not going to go into the details of these two types of migration, but we did want to mention when they may come into play. Next thing we look at is marking the PST files. This is useful for the Locate, Collect, and Migrate method, as well as the EVPM and PST Migrator wizards. The idea is that when the Outlook starts up, I can add certain information to the PST files that are associated with your profile. This can include the Vault site, your default mailbox archive, as well as your retention category. And then all the migration tools can then use this marker to automate a part of that PST migration process. By default, this is enabled in the desktop policy setting for your particular provisioning group. So this is showing you the example of where I would go and set that value. This is the desktop policy for a group of users named priority users. And I've gone to the list settings option on the advanced tab for Outlook. And at the top there you can see that mark PST files has been set to on. And again, that's just to show you that that is the default setting. Also, you have some additional configuration settings associated with the migration policy on the desktop, which is the pause interval, the work check interval, and the search interval. Once again, if you are looking for more detailed information about the individual settings on the advanced tab of the desktop policy, you can refer to the administrator's guide and the Enterprise Vault console help. Now, there is an option that's not actually displayed on the screen here. It's called Remove PST Entries. We did mention that one of the things that we can do as part of the Pst Migration Tools is to have the PST files automatically deleted from their original location based upon it being configured. Now, we have 4 different possible entries that we can make for the Remove PST Entries functionality. The first is to do not remove, and the do not remove has a value of 0. We have the remove if PST has been deleted. It has a value of 1. We have remove if PST is read-only. That has a value of 2. And then we have remove if PST is hidden, and that has a value of 4. The values are important because I can combine these settings into a single setting. For example, if I set the value for the remove PST entries to 6, that's a combination of 2, which is remove if it's read-only, and the 4, which is remove if it's hidden. So I would do it for both of those types of cases. I would remove the PST files. Some general guidelines or best practices for doing a PST migration. Remember that it took a very long time to generate all these PST files. There's a lot of old information that was removed from the Exchange servers and stored in these PST files because I was exceeding my Exchange quotas. So just realize that this PST migration is not an instantaneous type of a functionality. It is going to take some period of time. So you need to understand how your environment is going to impact that, and some of the things to consider when you're looking at your PST migration determination as far as which one of these tools you're going to use. You want to look at the total number and size of all the PST files in your infrastructure, where these PST files are located, how many users are actually using PST files, if there's any kind of a time restriction on migrating these PST files. For example, you have a project that says that you need to get rid of all PST files in your infrastructure as part of your company policy. So when does that have to be done by? And whether or not your users have been trained to work without PST files. Because again, if you're going to remove them, they're going to have to access the information that used to be in their PST files through their archives. So now we're going to look at some migration strategies. If the PST files are existing on the clients, which they're saying that the majority of the files exist on client machines, then what you would typically do is enable all the users' mailboxes that have PST files for archiving. As part of their desktop policy, when you set up their provisioning group, you will make sure that they have been enabled for PST marking. You will complete the archiving of all the mailbox backlogs, so everything that's in their mailboxes has been archived. You will then communicate the PST migration project and the timescales to the users so that they basically know that there's going to be periods of time during the migration process that they will not have access to the items in their PST files. Then if you're going to use the client-side driven migration, then you want to enable the users for that capability, and we'll be showing you how to do that a little bit later. And then you can use the locate, collect, and migrate to collect and migrate any files that were not going to be migrated from the individual clients, or if you have the PST files on file servers. And then you can use the PST migration wizard to clean up any additional remaining PST files that haven't already been migrated. If the majority of the PST files are living on my file servers, once again, I will enable all the users who have the PST files on the file servers for archiving. I will, again, with the desktop policy, enable the PST marking, complete the archiving backlog to make sure that everything's in the mailbox has, in fact, been archived. Once again, communicate about the PST migration project and a time scale to the users so that they know that there's going to be that period of time when they don't have access to the PST files. We'll then use the locate, collect, and migrate workflow, again, to collect and migrate the PST files from the file servers. And then we will use the Pst Migration wizard to clean up any PST files that were left behind. So let's start looking at these individual methods. The first one we're going to look at is migration with the locate, collect, and migrate method. With the locate, collect, and migrate method, we're going to do an overview of how that works. So here I have the PST files, and I'm representing a client workstation or a file server, as well as the Enterprise Vault server. That's what we're representing to start with here. So the locator task is going to be responsible for first locating the domains that are available that could have PST files in it. When I locate the domains, I will then typically go and find all the computers that are associated or in the Active Directory for that particular domain. Then once I've got all the computers in line, I will then go back to the individual computers and decide how I wish to actually look for the PST files. We'll see that we have two different ways of looking for the PST files. We can either do it by searching the registry, or we can actually do a hard drive search for the PST file extension. Once I've located all the files and where they're located, I can then run the Pst Collector Task. And what the Pst Collector Task does is it gathers up all the information or makes copies of all those PST files and places them in a temporary storage location called the PST holding folder. Once I've got all these PST files in the PST holding folder, I can then run the Pst Migrator Task, which will move all those items onto the Enterprise Vault server, first into a temporary folder, and then ultimately into the archive for that particular user that we have associated with the PST file. So let's start off with the Pst Locator Task. For the Pst Locator Task, before you create the Pst Locator Task, configure the Pst holding folder, and you're going to do that on the Site Properties. So you'll go to your Site Properties tab and open that up and actually specify the location. You want to make sure that you have plenty of space for that particular holding folder when you specify it. You'll schedule the task to run at various times, and you want it to run at different times because remember that there's going to be users that connect to the network and disconnect to the network, especially those laptop users. So you want to try to run it when they're going to be connected to the network to help you find them. And then you will typically, in a sequence, go through and do the run now, and then you'll look for the domains first. Then you'll go through and find the computers that are in those domains, and then you'll run the PST file to locate the actual physical PST files themselves, either through the registry or doing a disk locator search. As we mentioned, as part of creating this PST holding folder, you want to make sure that it has enough space to hold all the PST files you're going to be migrating. It's going to be a network share, and you configure this within the Site Properties again. This is that centralized holding area that's going to temporarily hold all the files once you've run the Pst Collector Task before you run the Pst Migrator Task. And also when you're setting this up, you want to make sure that it's hidden because you don't want the outside users there to have access to this particular folder, as well as making sure that the account that is running the actual PST tasks needs to have at a minimum the delete access to this PST holding folder. Adding the Pst Migration tasks, you do this through the Enterprise Vault Administration Console. You go from your directory to your site down to the Enterprise Vault servers. You expand the Enterprise Vault servers and get down to the task for the particular Enterprise Vault server you want to install the task on. And then you go to New, and you can select one of the three different tasks that you wish to select. When we're setting up the tasks, you're going to have one Pst Locator task per Enterprise Vault site. However, you can have multiple Pst Collector tasks and Pst Migrator tasks. Configuring the Pst Locator task, once you've set it up and created it, you can open up the properties of the Pst Migrator task and go to the Settings section. When you're doing the settings, one of the things that you can specify is that when you're looking for the Pst files that you do wish to go through the registry, and how often you wish to, between searches, wait before you go back and research the registry again. You can also go through and select the hard disk search functionality to be available. And if you do, you can specify again the interval between the times that you're going to go out and search the hard disks for the PST files. Then you also have the option of where you want to go through or how you wish to find the actual domains and the computers. And you can either use the NetBIOS calls or you can use Active Directory. And then down at the very bottom you have the option of the default search for the PSTs on each individual computer. There is a note here that says that by default the hard disk search and the default search for PSTs on each computer is turned off by default. And the reason why they do that is because in large enterprises, if you forgot to come in and configure these or decide whether you wanted it or didn't want it, that it could do an awful lot of loading down of your network as well as the Enterprise Vault servers themselves. To run the Pst Locator task, you just go into the Enterprise Vault Administration Console, right-click on it, and select Run Now. When you select the Run Now, because we haven't had any domains defined inside of the Pst Locator task, the only thing that will be available to you will be the search for new domains. You then click on the OK button. It'll go out and find whatever domains are available. In this particular example, they found a domain named example. And now we're going to go through and search that particular example domain for the computers that exist in the domain. To do that, we go through the list under the Personal Store Management section of the Enterprise Vault Administration Console, and you will see the computers that have been found. Once we've gone through and did the Run Now and put the check mark for Search for New Computers, those computers will show up in a list under the Personal Store Management. Then we can go ahead and go into the Personal Store Management, right-click on the individual servers, or we can select them for searching for the value to say yes, which is under the server properties there, by putting the check mark and search this computer when the Pst Locator task runs. And then once we set that up with the Run Now, we can tell it whether or not we wish to do the registry search alone, a hard disk search alone, or the hard disk and registry search together. Next, we're going to look at preparing the Pst files for collection. If a Pst file has been marked or the Pst file has been discovered within a user's profile, then the Pst Locator task will allocate a mailbox and a destination archive for that migrated Pst file. It does that by looking at who was the last person who accessed that particular Pst file. Also, it goes through the list of available mailboxes to see who the owner is to determine which mailbox to associate that particular item with. If the Pst Locator service is not able to identify a owner of that particular mailbox and a archive for that particular mailbox, then you can go through and set them up manually. You can select the mailbox of the user who owns the Pst, and then if you do select the owner and they do have an archive, it'll automatically select their default archive. Next, we're moving on to the Pst Collector Task. The Pst Collector Task copies the Pst files from their original locations into our Pst holding folder. It runs continuously when located within its schedule window. And again, you will set up scheduling for this, but basically what it's just saying is it just continuously runs within that window that you have set up for it. It does require delete access to the Pst holding folder because once it's done migrating, or the migration task moves it over to the Enterprise Vault server, I need to be able to delete that particular Pst file from the holding folder. And it controls whether to wait for backup before it proceeds to the migration task. And you can either do it one of two ways. You can set the migration status has been changed to ready to migrate, or you can use the archive bit on the actual physical file itself in the Pst holding folder. How do we configure the Pst Collector Task? Again, through our Enterprise Vault Administration Console, we can open up the properties associated with the Pst Collector Task. We can go to the Settings tab, and the first thing we have an option of specifying is the maximum number of PSTs to be placed in the holding area for migration by the computer. And again, this is trying to control bandwidth for moving or copying those files from the original locations to wherever the Pst holding folder is, as well as trying not to fill up that Pst holding folder before the migrator service has the ability to move those files over to the Enterprise Vault server. Also, you have the option of specifying whether or not you wish to wait for those PSTs to be backed up before you do migrate them. And if you select that option, you've got two different ways of determining when it's able to actually start the migration. You can either do it when you go in and change the migration status to ready to migrate, and we'll show you where you do that a little bit later in the lesson here. Or you can have the file attribute ready for archiving being reset. So that's looking at the archiving bit on the physical file in the holding folder. To view the files that have been collected and are in the holding folder location, I can go into the Enterprise Vault Administration Console, navigate down to the Personal Store Management section, and click on the Files node. And it will give us a list here of the Pst files that have been found. Also notice that in this particular view, I can see the Exchange mailbox that has been associated with this particular Pst files, as well as seeing the current status, whether or not I wish to currently migrate it, whether or not it's ready to copy, or if it's ready to migrate. Next, to display the results of the PST collection, I can go into the properties of the individual PST files that I found under the file section there. In this case here, I've opened up dpalmer1.pst file, and I can go through and see where the holding file is currently located. And this is where I can change the migration mode, if you will. In this particular case here, I've set it to ready to migrate. So when the migration task runs, it'll actually migrate it from the holding folder into the temporary folder that's on the Enterprise Vault server. Now we're going to move on to the Pst Migrator task. The Pst Migrator task is responsible for migrating those PST files that were collected and placed in the PST holding file. It moves them into a temporary folder on the Enterprise Vault server, and it can migrate several files concurrently, so it doesn't have to just do one at a time. It can be moving multiple files at the same time. And it performs the PST migration according to that particular user's Pst Migration policy. Now, in earlier lessons, we went through the policy section of the Enterprise Vault Administration Console, and we created the desktop and mailbox policies. But we also had in that section the capability of setting up Pst Migration Policies. Not only that, but also when we went through the provisioning in an earlier lesson, we saw that as an association with the provisioning group, we would specify the desktop policy, the mailbox policy to apply to the provisioning group, as well as the Pst Migration Policy. So there is a default Pst Migration Policy created as part of the installation of Enterprise Vault, but you can also go through and specify custom Pst Migration Policies if you wish. Looking at the Pst Migrator task itself and the settings that you can configure, you can configure the location of the temporary file, where that is located, and you can also configure how many concurrent files that the Pst Migrator task can be migrating concurrently. The default is 10, and again, make sure that you do have enough bandwidth and enough processing power available on the Enterprise Vault server before you start increasing that particular value. Also, you have the capability for not only specifying the location of those temporary files, but you can also specify going to a different tab, which is the logon tab, the account that you're going to be using to run the migrator task, and that account has to have full access to that temporary folder location on the Enterprise Vault server. To configure now we've gone back over to look at the Pst Migration Policies. Here in the Enterprise Vault Administration Console, we've shown you that under your directory, under your site, under your policies, and for Exchange, there's a Pst Migration Policy. We've opened up the properties. And again, we're going to be migrating these PST files, and the users are going to see them in their archives. So you have to determine whether or not you want them to be able to recall these items from their archives using shortcuts. So here on the Shortcut Creation tab, just like you could for the shortcut creation for your mailbox archiving, you can determine different settings that are going to be associated with the PST file migration, whether you want to create the shortcut, where you want to create that shortcut at. Once you're done with the migration, you can tell the Pst Migration Policy what to do when the migration is complete, and that's on the Pst Migration Policy Post Migration tab. You have the option first whether or not you want to delete the PST file, and then the actions that apply to the locate, collect, and migrate methodology. You can have them compact the PST file, set the PST file to be read-only, or to set the PST file to be hidden. But note that the statement right above those options says that that will not apply if you're doing the client-side migration or client-driven migration. So those settings only apply to the locate, collect, and migrate version, the Pst Migration Wizard, as well as the Enterprise Vault Policy Manager scripted version of the Pst migration. Running the Pst Migration task. When you're running the Pst Migrator task, it runs according to the preset schedule, and we saw that on the Pst Migration Schedule tab. We didn't actually go look at it, but the tab was there. You run it based upon that preset schedule, and unlike the other tasks, you run the Pst Migrator task immediately as follows. You just right-click on the task in the list of available tasks under the Enterprise Vault server, and you can select the Run Now option. The progress and the results from the run are being written to a report that's in the Enterprise Vault's Reports folder. Next, we want to look at the other tool that we want to talk about in this lesson, which is the client-driven PST migration. So we talked about, as far as from a migration strategy, that the locate, collect, and migrate strategy was really better for server side, where the PST migrations were most commonly going to be on a file server somewhere. The client-driven PST migration, we're going to go through and look at that we typically want to run the client-driven PST migration when we don't have ready access to the computer. So your laptop users that come on and come off, or maybe you have people that travel a lot and they only connect periodically to the network. Those are a good candidate for a client-driven environment. The administrators themselves do not actually need to connect to that client computer, and the user will still have continuous access to the PST file during the migration process. Also, a good thing about this one here is that if they are using Vault Cache, and we talked about Vault Cache in a previous lesson, the migration will add the PST items to the Vault Cache before the actual migration. So that will minimize the workload of the Enterprise Vault content synchronization when it downloads the Vault Cache content to the Vault Cache, by having those items from the PST file placed in Vault Cache prior to actually doing the PST migration. The basic process behind doing a PST-driven migration, we configure the PST migration messages, and we'll be looking at what those messages are. These are to help to provide hints and instruction to the user who will be performing the client-driven PST migration. That client will then go through and will send an email to that particular client, and for anybody who has been enabled for a client-driven migration. We'll then go ahead and the client thread will send the PST folder, or the PST files, in chunks to that holding folder, and that's the same PST holding folder that we specified for the locate, collect, and migrate functionality. And just like before, the PST migrator task will then run and bring the PST in chunks into that temporary folder on the Enterprise Vault server. Some configuration steps. Before you enable the client-driven PST migration, make sure that you've edited and copied the applicable PST migration messages into the Enterprise Vault root directory. The two that you're probably going to want to modify and edit, and just like the welcome message that we looked at in an earlier lesson, we have red text inside of these messages to give you guidance on how to edit them and what types of things to provide information for your users. The two main messages are enable PST migration message and the PST migrated message. So the first one is going to be sent out prior to actually doing the migration. The second one will be sent out after it's actually finished the migration process. You want to make sure that you review the PST migration policy that is associated with that particular user. And again, the PST migration policy is being assigned to that user based upon their provisioning group. If not already set up, make sure you set up the PST holding folder and the PST migrator task. Then you want to go through and enable the users for the client-driven PST migration. This is showing us the PST migration policy settings. On the migration tab, we've got several different settings that can be configured. One is overriding the retention category, as well as specifying the language that is associated with the particular PST file. For the client migration section, we can go through and specify whether or not we wish to automatically add space to the offline archives, and do we want to restrict the search to the PST files under the user's documents and settings folders. So again, when the client's searching for the PST files on their local machine, do we want to look for every PST file or just the one that's in their profile? There's some additional settings that are configured on the migration tab as well, which includes the do you want to migrate the deleted items folder, and do you want to archive non-expired calendar items. To enable the users, you go into the Enterprise Vault Administration Console, you go into the directory, the Enterprise Vault site, navigate down to the Personal Store Management, and then you right-click on the actual Personal Store Management. And you'll see that you have the option to either enable or disable the client-driven migrations. It'll take you through a wizard to allow you to choose which particular mailboxes you wish to enable for the client-side or client-driven migration. And then you also have the option, once you've enabled them, to go and run the disable client-driven migrations to disable them for the people you do not wish to have them continue that. A best practice kind of a note here is that you may want to just enable small groups of users until after they've migrated their PST files, so you don't have that one big surge of everybody trying to do it at the same time. We also mentioned the fact that as part of the client-driven PST migration, that if we have PST files and we're using Vault Cache, that it will migrate the items that are in the PST files into the Vault Cache. So in this particular example here, we're taking all the messages that are in the PST files. Those particular PST files are migrated or in the mailbox. They get placed into Vault Cache as part of the migration process. Then it'll actually be in the archive as well once those PST files have been correctly migrated. And then when I go through and do a synchronization for the header and or content synchronization checks, I'll see that those particular items are already in Vault Cache because they were placed there prior to the migration process. So therefore, I will not have to download the content, which would take up a lot of bandwidth for the synchronization. So now we have a table that basically gives you an overview, so you can go through and compare and contrast the issue that you're trying to perform versus which of the different methodologies as far as locate, collect, and migrate versus client-driven. And you can compare and contrast the different situations for some issues associated with that particular methodology. For examples, if the issue is the PST is being used and you use the locate, collect, and migrate, you cannot collect those files. You need to be able to do the client-driven to be able to migrate those PST files. So again, I'm not going to read the whole table to you. It's available here for your review. In this lesson, you identified the importance of migrating the PST files. In addition, you learned how to use the locate, collect, and migrate method for migrating the PST files. You also learned how to perform the migration using the client-driven method. The reference materials include the Enterprise Vault Administration Console Help System, the Installing and Configuring Guide, and the Administrator's Guide. And that brings us to the end of this lesson.